The preacher's voice had just asked if anyone objected to the union when the doors of the church burst open, and a woman in a scarlet dress strode down the aisle, her perfume preceding her like a storm cloud. And she pointed one gloved finger directly at Samuel Brennan and declared loud enough for everyone in Eureka, Nevada, to hear that he had promised to marry her first and that she was carrying his child. Sarah Bennett stood frozen at the altar in her mother's wedding dress, the white lace suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The small bouquet of wildflowers trembled in her hands as she watched Samuel's face drain of color, then flush red, then settle into something she had never seen before, a kind of cornered animal panic that told her everything she needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "Loretta, I can explain," Samuel stammered, and those 4 words shattered Sarah's world into pieces smaller than desert sand. The church erupted into chaos. Sarah's mother gasped from the front pew. Her father stood, his weathered rancher's hands clenched into fists. Samuel's family began shouting denials, then accusations flew back and forth like bullets in a gunfight. The woman in red, this Loretta, stood her ground with the confidence of someone holding all the cards in a poker game. Sarah just stood there, watching her future collapse. She had known Samuel Brennan since they were children. He worked at the mining office, keeping books and managing payroll. He wore clean shirts and had soft hands and spoke about building a proper house on the edge of town. He represented stability, respectability, everything her parents wanted for her. Everything she had convinced herself she wanted too. But now, as Loretta provided dates and details that Samuel could not dispute, as his protests grew weaker and his excuses more transparent, Sarah realized she was standing in front of the entire town in a wedding dress, about to marry a man who had been courting another woman the whole time. Worse, he had made promises to that woman, promises that resulted in consequences far more binding than the ones Sarah had almost made. "I will not marry him," Sarah said quietly, but her voice carried in the sudden silence that had fallen over the church. She set down her bouquet on the altar with hands that had stopped shaking because she had moved past shock into something colder and clearer. "This wedding is over." Samuel reached for her arm. "Sarah, please, we can work this out. She does not mean anything. It was a mistake. You are the one I want to marry. You are respectable. You are from a good family." Sarah pulled her arm away from his grasp, and in that moment she saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. He did not love her. He probably never had. She was convenient, appropriate, the kind of wife who would help his standing in the community. Whatever he felt for Loretta, at least it had been real enough to be reckless. "Get out," she said to him. "Get out of this church." But Samuel did not move. He stood there, his face cycling through emotions, and Sarah realized with growing horror that he was calculating. He was weighing his options right there in front of everyone. Loretta had claimed him already, but she was a saloon girl, someone who would hurt his reputation. Sarah was still standing here in a wedding dress, and if he could just smooth this over, convince her to forgive him, he could still have the respectable marriage he wanted. "Sarah, think about this," Samuel said, pitching his voice low, trying to sound reasonable. "Think about what you are doing. If you send me away now, everyone will talk. They will say you were jilted. They will say you could not keep your man. Is that what you want? Is that the story you want told about you?" The cruelty of it took her breath away. He was threatening her with shame, with the gossip that would follow her, trying to manipulate her into going through with a marriage to a man who had just been exposed as a liar and a cheat. "I would rather have them say I was jilted than say I was fool enough to marry you anyway," Sarah said, and she was proud that her voice did not waver. Her father had made his way to the altar now, his face like a thundercloud. "You heard my daughter. Get out, Brennan. Get out before I throw you out." Samuel looked around the church, seemed to realize that he had lost whatever sympathy he might have had, and finally, he turned and walked down the aisle. Loretta followed him, throwing a triumphant look back at Sarah that held both victory and pity. The church doors closed behind them, and Sarah was left standing at the altar alone. The whispers started immediately. Sarah could hear them rustling through the pews like wind through dry grass. She stood there, humiliated, heartbroken, and suddenly furious. This was not her fault, and yet she was the one standing here like a fool in a wedding dress while everyone stared and whispered and judged. She wanted to run. She wanted to gather up her skirts and flee through the back door of the church and never show her face in Eureka again. But her legs felt like they had taken root in the floorboards, and she could not seem to make them move. That was when she heard the sound of boots on the wooden floor, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere in the back of the church. A man stood up from the very last pew, a place where he must have been sitting so quietly that no one had really noticed him. Sarah did not recognize him immediately because he was not someone who drew attention to himself. But as he walked down the aisle toward her, she placed him. Dalton Owens, one of the ranch hands who worked on the property adjacent to her father's land. She had seen him in town occasionally, buying supplies or selling cattle. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He always wore the same dusty brown hat and kept to himself, speaking only when necessary. He walked all the way to the altar, his spurs making soft chinking sounds with each step, and when he reached Sarah, he took off his hat and held it in his hands. Up close, she could see that his face was sunburned and weathered from years of working outdoors, that he had a scar on his chin, that his eyes were the kindest she had ever seen. "Miss Bennett," he said quietly, his voice rough like he did not use it often. "I know this is not the proposal you expected, and I know I am not the man you plan to marry. But I have a small ranch, nothing fancy, but it is mine and it is paid for. I can provide for you. You would not want for necessities. And if you need a husband right now, this minute, to save your reputation and your pride, then I am offering. I will marry you. Right here, right now. I will stand beside you and say the vows, and no one in this town will be able to say you were left at the altar. They will say you married someone else instead." The church had gone completely silent. Sarah stared at this man, this stranger who was offering to marry her out of what pity, kindness, some misguided sense of chivalry. "You do not know me," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" "I know enough," Dalton said simply. "I know you did not deserve what just happened. I know you are standing here being stared at by the whole town, and I know what that feels like. I know what it is like to be the subject of gossip and judgment. And I know that sometimes a person just needs someone to stand beside them. So I am offering. You can say no, and I will walk back to my pew and you will never hear about this again. But if you want to say yes, I will be your husband, and I will treat you with respect and honesty, which is more than that man was willing to give you." Sarah's mind was reeling. This was insane. This was impulsive and reckless and completely illogical. She could not marry a stranger just because he offered, could she? But even as she thought it, she knew what would happen if she walked out of this church unmarried. Samuel had been right about one thing: people would talk. They would say she had been jilted, that she could not keep her man, that there must have been something wrong with her if her fiancé had preferred a saloon girl. The whispers would follow her everywhere. Men would assume she was desperate, available, fair game. Her reputation would be in tatters, and in a town as small as Eureka, that mattered more than it should. If she married Dalton Owens right now, the story would be different. It would be scandalous in a different way, certainly, but it would have a different ending. She would not be the woman who got left at the altar. She would be the woman who had the courage to marry someone else instead, and maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk. "You would really do this?" she asked, searching his face for any sign of doubt or mockery. She found none. He looked serious and steady and completely sincere. "I would not have offered if I did not mean it," Dalton said. Sarah took a deep breath. She thought about walking out of this church unmarried and facing the town's gossip. She thought about going home to her parents' ranch and watching her mother's disappointment and her father's anger. She thought about spending the rest of her life as the woman Samuel Brennan had thrown over for a saloon girl. Then she thought about the alternative, a stranger's offer of marriage. A man who was willing to stand beside her for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. A small ranch, a simple life, a chance to start over as someone new. "Yes," she said, and the word came out stronger than she expected. "Yes, I will marry you." She heard her mother gasp from the front pew, heard the renewed whispers spread through the church like wildfire. But Sarah kept her eyes on Dalton Owens, on this quiet cowboy who had just offered her an escape, and she saw the smallest hint of a smile touch the corner of his mouth. "Reverend," Dalton said, turning to the preacher who was still standing at the altar looking completely bewildered, "if you would be willing, I would like to marry this woman. Right now." The Reverend looked from Dalton to Sarah to the congregation and back again. "This is highly irregular," he said slowly. "Miss Bennett, are you certain? You do not have to do this. You can take time to think. You can wait." "I do not want to wait," Sarah said. "I want to do this now." Her father had made his way to the altar, his face red and confused. "Sarah, what are you doing? You cannot marry this man. You do not know him. He is a ranch hand. He has nothing." "He has more integrity than Samuel Brennan ever did," Sarah said quietly. "And he is willing to marry me without conditions or lies. That is enough." Her mother had joined them now, clutching her husband's arm. "Sarah, darling, you are in shock. You are not thinking clearly. Come home. We will sort this out. You do not have to make any rash decisions." "Mother, I am standing in a wedding dress in front of the entire town. Whatever decision I make right now will be judged as rash. I would rather make one that gives me some control over my own story." Dalton had remained quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up, addressing Sarah's parents directly. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, I understand your concern. I am not the man you chose for your daughter, but I give you my word that I will treat her well. She will be safe on my ranch. I will provide for her. And if, after a year, she decides she made a mistake, I will let her go. I will give her an annulment or a divorce, whichever she prefers, and I will not fight her on it. But right now, she needs someone to stand with her. I am offering to be that person." Sarah's father studied Dalton for a long moment, his rancher's instinct for judging character evident in the way he looked the younger man up and down. Finally, he sighed. "You are giving your word, on my honor, sir, and you are willing to let her go if she asks." "I am." Mr. Bennett looked at his daughter. "Sarah, is this truly what you want?" Sarah nodded. "It is." Her father stepped back, and though he did not look happy, he nodded at the Reverend. "Proceed." The Reverend still looked uncertain, but he opened his Bible and turned to the marriage ceremony. "Very well. If there are no objections." The church remained silent, though the air was thick with shock and speculation and scandal. "Dalton Owens, do you take this woman, Sarah Bennett, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Dalton said clearly. "Sarah Bennett, do you take this man, Dalton Owens, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Sarah looked at this stranger, this quiet cowboy who had saved her from the worst moment of her life, and said, "I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Dalton looked at Sarah, silently asking permission, and she nodded slightly. He leaned in and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her lips. It was nothing like the passionate embraces she had imagined with Samuel, but it was genuine and respectful, and in that moment, it was exactly what she needed. They turned to face the congregation together, and Sarah realized she was married. She was actually married to a man she had spoken to for perhaps 5 minutes total. It was insane and terrifying, and somehow, inexplicably, it felt like she had just made the first truly honest decision of her life. The church erupted into chaos again, but this time Sarah did not feel frozen. She took Dalton's offered arm, and they walked down the aisle together while the town exploded into gossip behind them. Outside the church, the Nevada sun was bright and hot, and Sarah blinked in the sudden light. A wagon was tied up near the church, a simple working wagon with 2 sturdy horses. Dalton led her to it without a word and helped her up onto the bench seat, her wedding dress billowing around her like a white cloud. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "My ranch is about an hour from here," he said as he urged the horses into motion. "It is not much, but it is home. I have a small house, a barn, some cattle, and a few horses. I do most of the work myself, but I hire help during roundup. It is quiet, peaceful. I think you will like it." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Now that the adrenaline was fading, reality was setting in. She had just married a complete stranger. She was leaving her family, her home, everything she knew, to go live on a ranch with a man she knew nothing about. What had she done? As if sensing her panic, Dalton glanced at her. "You can relax, Miss Sarah. I mean Mrs. Owens. I know this is strange and sudden. I know you must be feeling all kinds of things right now. But I meant what I said in the church. You are safe with me. I will not hurt you or force anything on you. We can take this as slow as you need. The house has 2 bedrooms. You can have your own space. We can get to know each other properly before we become a true husband and wife, if that is what you want." The relief that flooded through Sarah was so intense she felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know you did an incredibly kind thing back there. I know you did not have to offer what you did. I do not understand why you did it, but I am grateful." Dalton was quiet for a moment as they drove through the town and out onto the open road that led into the Nevada hills. "About 5 years ago," he said finally, "I was engaged to be married. Her name was Margaret. We had been courting for 2 years, and I thought we were happy. But a week before the wedding, she ran off with a gambler who came through town. Left me a note saying she could not face telling me to my face. I stood in front of the church that day and had to tell everyone that there would not be a wedding. I know it is not exactly the same as what happened to you, but I know what it feels like to be humiliated in front of everyone. I know what it is like to be the subject of pity and gossip. I would not wish that on anyone." Sarah looked at him with new understanding. "I am sorry that happened to you." "It was a long time ago," Dalton said with a shrug. "And looking back, I think Margaret did me a favor. We would not have been happy together. She wanted excitement and adventure and things I could not give her. She would have been miserable on a ranch. But at the time, it felt like the end of the world." "That is how I feel right now," Sarah admitted. "Like everything I thought I knew was a lie. Samuel and I have been courting for a year and a half. How did I not see what he was really like? How did I not know he was seeing someone else?" "People show us what they want us to see," Dalton said. "That does not make you foolish. It makes him a liar." They drove in silence for a while, the landscape rolling past in shades of brown and gold. The hills around Eureka were dotted with scrub brush, and the occasional twisted juniper. In the distance, the mountains rose up purple and hazy. It was harsh country, beautiful in its own way but unforgiving. "Tell me about your ranch," Sarah said, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own churning thoughts. Dalton's face softened slightly. "It is about 200 acres, most of it grazing land. I run about 50 head of cattle, mostly for beef, and I have a small herd of horses that I breed and train. The house is small, just 4 rooms, but it is solid. I built most of it myself. There is a creek that runs through the property, so we have good water year-round. I have a vegetable garden, or at least I try to. I am not much of a gardener, and there is a barn and a few outbuildings." "It sounds nice," Sarah said, and meant it. It sounded simple and honest and real, which was more than she could say about the life she had been planning with Samuel. "It is a lot of work," Dalton said honestly. "Ranch life is not easy, especially out here. The winters can be hard. We get snowed in sometimes, and the summers are hot and dry. But I like it. I like the quiet. I like knowing that what I build and what I grow is mine. I like the honesty of it." "I grew up on a ranch," Sarah said. "My father raises cattle too, though his spread is bigger than yours. I know what the work is like. I can help." Dalton looked at her with surprise. "You do not have to. I do not expect you to work like a ranch hand. I can manage." "I want to help," Sarah said firmly. "I cannot just sit around the house all day. I will go mad. I can cook and clean, yes, but I can also help with the animals. I am good with horses." The smallest smile crossed Dalton's face. "Then I guess I married the right woman." They continued on, the road winding through the hills. Sarah found herself relaxing slightly despite everything. There was something calming about Dalton's presence. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary chatter. He did not try to reassure her with empty promises or platitudes. He just drove the wagon and let her have space to think and feel whatever she needed to feel. After about an hour, they turned off the main road onto a smaller track that led through a narrow valley. Sarah could see the creek Dalton had mentioned, a ribbon of green cutting through the brown landscape. As they came around a bend, a small house came into view, nestled against a hillside with the barn and outbuildings nearby. It was not much to look at, honestly. The house was simple, built of rough timber with a stone chimney. The barn was weathered but looked sturdy. There was a corral with several horses and a larger pasture where cattle grazed, but it had a certain charm to it, a sense of being well cared for and loved. "This is it," Dalton said, bringing the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Welcome home, Sarah. Home." The word felt strange and foreign, but Sarah climbed down from the wagon and looked around. The air smelled like sage and dust and animals. The creek burbled in the background. A pair of hawks circled overhead. It was quiet and isolated and completely different from the life she had imagined for herself. Dalton helped her down, careful not to tear her wedding dress, and led her to the front door. The inside of the house was clean and sparse. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a fireplace, a table, a few chairs, and some basic cooking equipment. There were 2 doors leading off the main room. "That one is my bedroom," Dalton said, pointing to the left door. "This one is the spare room, or I guess it is your room now. It is not fancy, just a bed and a dresser, but it is clean." He opened the door, and Sarah saw a small room with a simple bed, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out toward the creek. It was plain but clean, and there was something appealing about its simplicity. "It is fine," Sarah said. "Thank you." Dalton nodded. "I will bring in some water so you can wash up. I imagine you want to get out of that dress." Sarah looked down at the white lace and felt a surge of complicated emotions. This dress had been her mother's. She had been so excited to wear it this morning. Now it just felt like a costume from a play that had gone horribly wrong. I do not have any other clothes here, she realized suddenly. Everything I own is still at my parents' house. We can go back and get your things tomorrow, Dalton said. For tonight, I can lend you a shirt and some trousers. They will be too big, but they will be comfortable. The thought of wearing men's clothing was shocking and improper, and somehow exactly what Sarah needed. She nodded gratefully. Dalton left and returned with a bucket of water and some clothes. He set them on the dresser and then retreated, closing the door behind him to give her privacy. Sarah peeled off the wedding dress, struggling with the buttons down the back. She managed eventually and let the dress fall to the floor in a pool of white lace. She washed her face and hands in the cold water, then pulled on the clothes Dalton had left. The shirt was soft flannel, worn and comfortable. The trousers were indeed too big, but she rolled up the cuffs and cinched them with the belt he had provided. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the dresser and almost laughed. She looked ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up. But she also looked more like herself than she had in the wedding dress. That dress had been someone else's dream. These clothes were just practical and real. She emerged from the bedroom to find Dalton at the stove, heating something in a pot. He glanced at her and nodded approvingly. "Those suit you better than the dress did." "I must look absurd. You look comfortable. That is what matters." He ladled something into 2 bowls and set them on the table. "It is just stew. I made it yesterday, so it is nothing fancy, but you must be hungry." Sarah realized she was starving. She had been too nervous to eat breakfast, and then everything had happened at the church. She sat down at the table and tried the stew. It was simple but good, with beef and vegetables in a rich broth. They ate in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that Sarah had never experienced with Samuel. Samuel had always needed to fill every silence with talk about himself, his work, his plans. Dalton seemed content to just exist in the moment. "What happens now?" Sarah asked finally, setting down her spoon. "Whatever you want to happen," Dalton said. "Like I said, we can take this slow, get to know each other, become friends first maybe, see where things go from there." "But we are married," Sarah said. "We made vows in front of everyone." "Are we just supposed to pretend to be a normal married couple when people see us?" "I suppose we will have to," Dalton agreed. "But what happens between us in private, that is our business. No one else needs to know." Sarah considered this. "You really would let me go after a year if I wanted?" "I would," Dalton said seriously. "I meant that. I am not trying to trap you, I just wanted to help you in that moment. If you decide this is not the life you want, I will understand. That is very generous. It is just fair." Sarah studied him across the table. He was a hard man to read. His face did not show much emotion, and he spoke sparingly. But everything he did showed a basic decency that was rare in her experience. "Why did you never remarry after Margaret left?" she asked. Dalton shrugged. "I did not meet anyone I wanted to marry. I am not much for socializing. I do my work, sell my cattle, buy what I need, and come back home. There are not a lot of opportunities to meet women in that routine, and I suppose I was wary. Margaret taught me that you cannot always trust what people show you. And yet you married me, a complete stranger. That is different. I was not marrying you because I had illusions about who you were. I was marrying you to help you out of a bad situation. There is no deception in that. We both know what this is." "What is it?" Sarah asked softly. Dalton met her eyes. "A chance, maybe, for both of us. A chance to start over. A chance to build something real without all the expectations and lies that come with normal courtship. We can just be honest with each other. That is rare." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. He was right. As strange and sudden as this marriage was, there was a freedom in it too. She did not have to pretend to be someone she was not. She did not have to live up to expectations. She could just be herself and see what happened. "I think I can work with that," she said. They finished their meal and cleaned up together. Dalton showed her where things were kept in the kitchen, explaining his routine and his schedule. He woke at dawn to tend to the animals, worked through the day on various ranch tasks, and went to bed shortly after sunset. It was a simple, uncomplicated life. "You should rest," Dalton said as the sun began to set outside the windows. "It has been a long day." That was an understatement. Sarah felt exhausted, emotionally and physically. She nodded and retreated to her small bedroom. The bed was narrow but comfortable, with clean sheets and a warm quilt. She lay down fully clothed and expected to lie awake for hours, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, pulled under by exhaustion and the strange relief of being somewhere new, somewhere where no one was staring at her with pity or judgment, somewhere where she could just be. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The church, Samuel, the woman in red, Dalton standing up and offering to marry her. She sat up and realized she could hear movement in the main room. Dalton must already be up. She quickly changed back into the two big clothes and emerged to find him at the stove, frying eggs and bacon. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "I hope you slept well." "I did, surprisingly." "Ranch air will do that. Makes you sleep like the dead." He plated the food and set it on the table. "Eat up. I thought we could go into town after breakfast and get your things from your parents' house." Sarah's stomach clenched at the thought of facing her family and the town again. "Do we have to go back so soon?" "You need clothes," Dalton said practically. "And probably other things. Your personal belongings. We should get them before people start making assumptions about why you are not going back." He was right, of course. Sarah ate her breakfast and tried to prepare herself mentally for the coming ordeal. After they ate, Dalton hitched up the wagon again, and they headed back toward town. The ride felt shorter in daylight, and before Sarah was ready, they were pulling up in front of her parents' house. Her mother must have been watching for them because she came out onto the porch before they had even fully stopped. "Sarah," she said, her face a mixture of relief and worry and confusion. "Come inside, both of you. We need to talk." Sarah glanced at Dalton, who nodded and followed her up the steps. Inside the familiar house, her father was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like he had aged 10 years overnight. When he saw Sarah, he stood up. "Are you all right?" he asked gruffly. "I am fine, Papa," Sarah said. "I came to get my things." "Sarah, we need to discuss what happened yesterday," her mother said. "You cannot just run off and marry a stranger and expect us not to have questions." "I did not run off," Sarah said quietly. "I made a choice." "Maybe not the choice you wanted me to make, but it was mine to make." "You do not know this man," her father said, gesturing at Dalton. "I knew Samuel for a year and a half, and look how that turned out," Sarah replied. "At least Dalton has been honest with me from the start." Her mother twisted her hands together. "The whole town is talking, Sarah. The scandal is enormous. People are saying terrible things." "Let them talk," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "I would rather be the subject of gossip as a married woman than as a jilted one." Her father studied Dalton, who stood quietly near the door, his hat in his hands. "You gave me your word yesterday that you would treat my daughter well. Do you still stand by that?" "I do, sir," Dalton said. "And this promise to let her go if she wants. That still stands too?" "It does." Mr. Bennett sighed deeply. "Then I suppose there is nothing more to be said. Sarah is an adult. She made her choice. We may not understand it, but we have to respect it." Her mother looked like she wanted to argue, but her father gave her a look, and she pressed her lips together. "I will help you pack your things," she said to Sarah. Sarah followed her mother to her bedroom, the room she had slept in since she was a child. Her mother pulled out a trunk and began folding Sarah's dresses and placing them inside with careful precision. "Are you sure about this?" Her mother asked softly. "It is not too late. If you wanted, we could find a way to end this marriage. We could say it was made under duress. We could get it annulled." "I do not want it annulled," Sarah said. "Mama, I know this seems crazy. It seems crazy to me too, but Dalton is a good man. I can tell. And more than that, he is giving me a choice. He is letting me decide what my life looks like. Samuel never did that. Samuel just assumed I would fit into whatever plans he had made." Her mother's hand stilled on the dress she was folding. "I just want you to be happy, sweetheart." "I know. But you cannot decide what will make me happy. I have to figure that out for myself." They finished packing in silence, filling the trunk with Sarah's clothes, her books, her few pieces of jewelry, and her personal items. Her mother added linens and quilts, practical things Sarah would need for running a household. When they returned to the main room, Dalton immediately moved to carry the heavy trunk. "I can help with that, sir," Sarah's father said, and the two men carried the trunk out to the wagon together. When they returned, Mr. Bennett held out his hand to Dalton. "You take care of her. She is stubborn and she has a temper, but she is the best daughter a man could ask for." "Papa," Sarah protested, but she was fighting back tears. Dalton shook her father's hand. "I will do my best, sir." Sarah hugged her parents goodbye, and then she and Dalton were back in the wagon, heading out of town. She did not look back. She kept her eyes forward on the open road ahead, on the hills rolling out toward the horizon. "That was hard," she said after a while. "Necessary things often are," Dalton replied. When they got back to the ranch, Dalton carried her trunk into the house and left her to unpack while he went to tend to the animals. Sarah spent the afternoon arranging her belongings in the small bedroom, making it feel more like her space. She hung her dresses in the narrow wardrobe, arranged her books on the windowsill, and spread her own quilt on the bed. As she worked, she found herself listening to the sounds of the ranch. The lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, the creak of the barn door, and underneath it all, the constant burble of the creek. It was peaceful in a way she had not expected. That evening she made dinner using the supplies in Dalton's kitchen. It was simple fare, just fried chicken and biscuits and greens, but it felt good to contribute something. When Dalton came in from his work, dusty and tired, he looked surprised to see the table set and food waiting. "You did not have to do this," he said. "I wanted to. Besides, you cooked for me last night. It is only fair." They ate together, and Sarah found herself telling him about growing up on her father's ranch, about learning to ride before she could read, about helping with roundups and brandings and all the other aspects of ranch life. "I always loved it," she said. "But when I got older, my mother started insisting I should act more like a lady. She wanted me to focus on learning to run a household, on attracting a good husband. I went along with it because it seemed like that was what I was supposed to do. But I never really fit into that mold." "You do not have to fit into any mold here," Dalton said. "You can be whoever you are." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Sarah helped with the ranch work during the day, feeding animals, mending fences, tending the garden. She proved to be as capable as she had claimed, handling the horses with skill and working alongside Dalton without complaint. In the evenings, they would have dinner together and talk, slowly learning each other's histories and personalities. Sarah learned that Dalton had grown up in California, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had been farmers, but when gold fever struck, his father and older brothers had headed for the mining camps, leaving Dalton to try to keep the farm running with his mother. They had failed, losing the land to debt, and his mother had died shortly after. Dalton had worked as a ranch hand for years, saving every penny until he had enough to buy this small piece of land in Nevada. "I wanted something that was mine," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Something no one could take away from me. This ranch is small, but it is paid for. I owe nothing to anyone." "That must be a good feeling," Sarah said. "It is. But it is also lonely sometimes. I never minded being alone, but there is a difference between choosing solitude and having it forced on you." Sarah understood what he meant. "I felt lonely with Samuel," she admitted. "Even when we were together, I felt like I was performing for him. Like I was playing the role of the woman he wanted me to be instead of just being myself." "You do not have to perform for me," Dalton said quietly. "I like who you are just fine." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. They were simple, but they felt more genuine than any of Samuel's flowery compliments had ever been. As spring turned to summer, Sarah found herself growing more comfortable on the ranch and more comfortable with Dalton. He was easy to be around, never demanding or presumptuous. He treated her with respect and consideration, always mindful of her space and her needs. But she also noticed the way he would look at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, a softness in his expression that suggested his feelings were deepening beyond simple kindness. She felt it too, this growing attachment. She liked the way he moved, economical and purposeful. She liked his quiet competence, the way he could fix anything that broke and solve any problem that arose. She liked the rare moments when he smiled, usually at something she said or did, and the way his whole face transformed in those moments. One evening in late June, they were out checking on the cattle in the far pasture when a summer storm rolled in suddenly, the way they did in Nevada. The sky went dark and rain began to pour down in sheets. They ran for the barn, both of them soaked to the skin by the time they got inside. Sarah was laughing, exhilarated by the run and the wild weather. Dalton was watching her with that soft expression she was beginning to recognize, and suddenly the air between them felt charged with more than just the electricity of the storm. "Sarah," he said, and there was something different in his voice, something raw and honest. "These past few months have been the best I can remember in a long time. I know we started this marriage for practical reasons, but I need you to know that my feelings have changed. I care about you, more than I probably should. I am falling in love with you, and I need to know if there is any chance you might feel the same way." Sarah's heart was pounding. She looked at this man who had saved her from humiliation, who had given her a home and his name and his respect, who had been endlessly patient while she healed from the hurt Samuel had caused. And she realized that somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with him too. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "I did not expect to, but I do. I love you, Dalton." The smile that crossed his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "Can I kiss you? Really kiss you this time, not like in the church?" "Yes," Sarah breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was nothing like the brief peck at their wedding. This kiss was deep and passionate and full of all the feelings they had been holding back. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and he held her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you are not going to ask for an annulment in a year?" Sarah laughed. "No, I am not. I am staying right here with you." "Good," he said and kissed her again. That night Sarah did not sleep in the spare bedroom. She went to Dalton's room, and they became husband and wife in truth, not just in name. It was tender and passionate, and everything Sarah had hoped intimacy would be, made more meaningful by the foundation of trust and respect they had built. In the morning, Sarah woke wrapped in Dalton's arms, the sun streaming through the window, and felt happier than she could ever remember feeling. This was not the life she had planned. This was better. The summer passed in a blur of work and growing love. They were partners in every sense of the word, working the ranch together during the day and falling into each other's arms at night. Sarah had never felt so valued, so seen, so loved. Dalton was not a man of flowery words, but he showed his love in 1,000 small ways, in the way he made her coffee in the morning, in the way he worried about her when she worked too hard, in the way he held her as they watched the stars. In September, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, and then she told Dalton one evening over dinner. "I am pregnant," she said simply. Dalton dropped his fork, his eyes going wide. "Truly, truly." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "That is wonderful. That is the best news. Are you happy? I mean, I know it is soon. We have only been truly married for a few months. If you are not ready, if you are scared, that is all right." "I am happy," Sarah said, and realized she meant it completely. "I am so happy. I want to have a child with you. I want to build a family here." Dalton kissed her, slow and deep and full of joy. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. The pregnancy progressed without complications. Sarah continued to help with lighter ranch work while Dalton fussed over her and tried to get her to rest more. In March, when the snow was melting and the first signs of spring were appearing, Sarah went into labor. Dalton had ridden to town to fetch the midwife, and Mrs. Henderson arrived in time to help Sarah through the birth. It was long and painful and exhausting, but when it was over, Sarah held a squalling baby boy in her arms. "You have a son," Mrs. Henderson announced to Dalton, who was pacing in the main room. He came into the bedroom, his face alight with wonder and fear and love. Sarah held out the baby to him, and he took his son with trembling hands. "He is perfect," Dalton whispered. "Sarah, he is perfect. What should we name him?" "I was thinking James," Sarah said, "after your father." Dalton looked at her with eyes that were suspiciously wet. "You would do that, of course. Your father should be honored. James Owens. It is a good name." Little James was a healthy, happy baby who quickly became the center of their world. Dalton was a devoted father, patient and gentle with his son. Sarah watched him with the baby and fell even more in love with him, seeing this new side of the quiet cowboy who had saved her. When James was 6 months old, Sarah's parents came to visit for the first time since the wedding. They had stayed away, giving the young couple space to build their marriage, but now they came bearing gifts for their grandson. Sarah's mother held James and cried happy tears. "I am sorry," she said to Sarah. "I am sorry I doubted your choice. I can see how happy you are here. I can see how much he loves you." "I forgive you, Mama," Sarah said. "You were just worried about me." Her father pulled Dalton aside while they were looking at the cattle. "You kept your word," he said simply. "You have taken good care of my daughter, better than I could have hoped. I am glad she married you." The years passed in a steady rhythm of seasons and work and love. When James was 3, Sarah gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Lily, who kept the household in a state of joyful chaos. 2 years after that, another son arrived named Thomas. The little house that had seemed empty when Sarah first arrived now rang with the laughter and noise of children. Dalton expanded the ranch over the years, buying adjacent land when it became available, increasing the herds, building a bigger barn. But he never forgot what was important. Every evening, no matter how much work needed to be done. He came home to have dinner with his family. Every night, he helped put the children to bed, and then held Sarah in his arms and told her he loved her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they threw a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors and Sarah's parents. As Sarah looked around at the people gathered on her porch, at her 4 beautiful children playing in the yard, at her husband standing beside her with his arm around her waist, she marveled at how different her life had turned out from what she had planned. If Samuel had not abandoned her at the altar, she would never have married Dalton. She would never have found this life, this love, this bone-deep happiness. In a strange way, Samuel had given her the greatest gift, even if he had not meant to. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked, pulling her close. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Sarah said. "How lucky we are." "I am the lucky one," Dalton said. "The day I stood up in that church was the day my life really began." "Our lives," Sarah corrected. "We built this together." "Together," Dalton agreed, and kissed her as their children squealed with laughter and the sun set over their ranch, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and pink. The children grew. James proved to have his father's quiet competence and love of ranch work. He spent every moment he could with Dalton, learning how to train horses and manage cattle and fix whatever broke. The twins were wildly different despite being born minutes apart. Emma was bookish and dreamy, always reading or drawing. Lily was a tomboy who preferred working outside with her brother and father to doing household chores. Thomas, the baby, was charming and mischievous, able to talk his way out of any trouble. Sarah homeschooled all 4 children, teaching them reading and writing and arithmetic at the kitchen table. Dalton taught them practical skills, how to ride and rope and survive in the harsh Nevada landscape. Together, they raised children who were capable and kind and hardworking. When James turned 18, he began courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, the daughter of one of Dalton's friends. Her name was Catherine, and she was sweet and sensible and clearly adored James. They were married the following year in the same church where Sarah and Dalton had wed, and Sarah could not help but think about the contrast between the 2 weddings, one born of scandal and the other of simple, honest love. The twins were 15 when tragedy struck the town. A fever swept through Eureka, killing several people, mostly the very young and very old. Sarah's father caught it and died within a week. Her mother, heartbroken, followed him a month later. Sarah grieved deeply for her parents, but Dalton was there to hold her through it, just as she had been there for him through all the challenges of building a life together. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters and sick cattle and all the other difficulties that came with ranch life. They could weather this too. Sarah's inheritance from her parents allowed them to expand the ranch even further. They hired a few permanent hands to help with the increased workload, building a bunkhouse for them near the barn. The ranch that Dalton had started alone had grown into a prosperous operation that could support not just their own family, but provide employment for others. Emma announced at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher. She had no interest in ranch life and asked if she could go to the teaching college in Carson City. Sarah and Dalton talked it over and decided to support her dream, even though it meant she would be far from home. They scraped together the money for tuition and saw her off on the stage, both proud and heartbroken to see their daughter striking out on her own. Lily had no such ambitions to leave. She declared that she would help run the ranch and never marry because no man would want a wife who could outride and outrope him. Sarah and Dalton exchanged amused looks but did not argue. Lily was 18 and headstrong, and they had learned long ago that she would find her own path. Thomas, at 15, was still trying to figure out what he wanted. He liked the ranch but also talked about seeing more of the world. "How can I know what I want if I have never seen anything else?" he asked his parents one evening. "You cannot," Dalton said honestly. "When you are ready, if you want to travel and see what else is out there, your mother and I will help you. But there is no rush. You have time to figure it out." As Sarah approached her mid-40s, she watched her children becoming adults and reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She had been 24 years old when Samuel had humiliated her in front of the entire town. She had been so sure that her life was over, that she would never be happy again. Instead, she had found a happiness deeper and more real than anything she had imagined in her carefully planned future with Samuel. She had found a partner who respected her, valued her, loved her for exactly who she was. She had raised 4 children in a home full of love and laughter. She had built a life that was meaningful and full. One evening in early autumn, when the aspens were turning gold on the hillsides and there was a hint of winter in the air, Sarah and Dalton sat on the porch together watching the sunset. The children were grown or nearly so. The ranch was thriving. They had been married for 20 years. "Do you ever think about that day in the church?" Sarah asked. "About what possessed you to stand up and offer to marry me?" Dalton was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think about it sometimes. Honestly, I am not entirely sure what made me do it. It was not planned. I had come to the church because I knew you slightly from seeing you around town, and I thought you seemed like a good person. When Samuel did what he did, I just felt so angry on your behalf. And then I saw you standing there and I thought about how I had felt when Margaret left me and I just stood up. I did not really think it through." "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked. Dalton turned to look at her, his weathered face soft with love. "Regret it? Sarah, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. It was reckless and foolish and completely impulsive, and it gave me everything I have. How could I possibly regret it?" "I do not regret it either," Sarah said. "I know I am supposed to say I wish it had happened differently, that I wish Samuel had been a better man, that I wish I had not been humiliated like that. But honestly, I am glad things happened exactly as they did, because otherwise I would not have this life. I would not have you." Dalton reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "We have built something good, have we not?" "We have built something extraordinary," Sarah said. They sat there as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear Thomas playing the harmonica that Dalton had taught him to play. In the distance, a coyote called and another answered. "I love you," Dalton said, and even after 20 years the words still made Sarah's heart flutter. "I love you too," she replied. "Always." The years continued to roll by like the seasons, inevitable and steady. Emma graduated from teaching college and took a position in a school in Carson City. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of descriptions of her students and the city and her life. Eventually, she wrote to say she had met someone, a lawyer named Michael, and she was going to marry him. Sarah and Dalton traveled to Carson City for the wedding and met Michael, who proved to be a kind, intelligent man who clearly adored their daughter. James and Catherine had their first child, making Sarah and Dalton grandparents for the first time. Sarah held her tiny grandson and felt the circle of life continuing, the ranch and the family carrying on into the next generation. Lily surprised everyone by falling in love with one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named Peter, who was one of the few men who could keep up with her in the saddle. They married in a simple ceremony on the ranch, and Peter became Dalton's right-hand man, helping run the operation as Dalton began to slow down in his 60s. Thomas did eventually leave to see the world, working on a cattle drive to California, and then taking a job on the railroad. But after 2 years, he came home, declaring that he had seen enough of the world and that nothing out there was as good as home. He built a house on the far corner of the ranch property and began raising horses, a venture that proved surprisingly profitable. When Sarah was in her 50s, she began to struggle with her health. A persistent cough that would not go away, a tiredness that rest could not cure. The doctor in Eureka examined her and shook his head gravely. Her lungs, he said, were weak. The harsh Nevada air and dust were taking their toll. She needed rest and to avoid overexertion. Dalton was beside himself with worry. He hired help for all the household chores, insisted Sarah stay inside on windy days when the dust was bad, fussed over her constantly. Sarah appreciated his care but also chafed at the restrictions. She had never been one to sit idle. "I am not an invalid," she protested one afternoon when Dalton tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know you are not," Dalton said, "but I am not ready to lose you. I will do whatever it takes to keep you with me as long as possible." His words, raw and honest, took the fight out of her. She let him help her back inside and sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace. Dalton sat beside her, holding her hand, and they watched the fire in silence. "I am scared," Sarah admitted quietly. "I am not ready to leave you or the children or this life we built." "Then stay," Dalton said fiercely. "Fight, stay with me." And she did fight. She followed the doctor's orders, rested when she needed to, took care of herself. Slowly, over months, her condition stabilized. The cough never fully went away, and she tired more easily than she once had. But she was still here, still with her family. Still with Dalton. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. James and Catherine brought their 3 children. Emma came from Carson City with Michael and their 2 daughters. Lily and Peter were there with their young son. Thomas came from his house across the property. The ranch was full of children and laughter and love. Sarah stood on the porch watching her family, 3 generations now, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She felt Dalton's arm come around her waist, and she leaned into him. 30 years, he said. 30 years since I stood up in that church and did the craziest thing I have ever done." "The best thing," Sarah corrected. "The best thing," he agreed. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed or home, Sarah and Dalton lay together in the darkness of their bedroom. They were both in their mid-50s now, their hair gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work and life. But when Dalton held her, Sarah still felt like the young woman who had married him in a moment of desperation and found love beyond her wildest dreams. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For standing up that day. For offering to marry me. For giving me this life." "Sarah, you gave me this life as much as I gave it to you. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You brought joy and purpose and meaning to everything. You gave me a family and a home in the truest sense. I should be thanking you." "Then let us just thank each other," Sarah said, and kissed him in the darkness. The seasons turned. Summer gave way to fall, fall to winter, winter to spring. Sarah's health remained fragile but stable. She could not work like she once had, but she could sit on the porch and watch the ranch operate, could hold her grandchildren, could have dinner with her family, could lie in her husband's arms at night. It was enough. It was more than enough. On a spring morning when Sarah was 58, she woke feeling strange, a heaviness in her chest that was different from the usual struggle with her breathing. She tried to sit up and found she could not. Dalton was already awake, dressing for the day's work, and he turned when he heard her gasp. "Sarah!" He was at her side in an instant, his face tight with fear. "What is wrong?" "I do not know," she managed to say. "Something is not right." Dalton sent Thomas racing to town for the doctor, but Sarah knew, even as he did it, that it was too late. Whatever was happening, it was happening too fast. She reached for Dalton's hand and held it tight. "I need to tell you something." "Do not," he said, his voice breaking. "Do not say goodbye. You are going to be fine. The doctor will come and fix this." "Dalton, please, let me say this." Sarah struggled for breath. "These 34 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You saved me that day in the church. You saved me and gave me everything. I love you so much. Promise me you will be all right. Promise me you will take care of yourself and let the children take care of you." "I promise," Dalton said, tears streaming down his face. "But you have to promise me something too. Promise you will fight. Promise you will not give up." "I promise to try," Sarah said. "But if this is my time, I need you to know I am at peace. I have lived a full, beautiful life. I have been loved by you. That is everything." The doctor arrived too late. By the time he climbed down from his buggy, Sarah was gone, slipping away peacefully in Dalton's arms as the sun rose over the ranch they had built together. The funeral was held 3 days later in the same church where Sarah and Dalton had married. The whole town came, filling the pews just as they had 34 years earlier. But this time, instead of gossip and scandal, there was genuine grief and respect. Sarah had become a beloved figure in the community over the years, known for her kindness and her strength and her generous spirit. Dalton stood at the front of the church, his children surrounding him, and felt like his heart had been ripped out of his chest. He had known, intellectually, that this day would come eventually. But knowing and experiencing were two very different things. Sarah had been his partner, his love, his best friend for more than 3 decades. How was he supposed to continue without her? But he had made her a promise, so he tried. He got up every morning even when all he wanted was to lie in bed and give up. He ate the meals his daughters brought him. He let his sons help run the ranch. He played with his grandchildren and attended family dinners, and did all the things Sarah would have wanted him to do, but the joy had gone out of life. Everything reminded him of her. The kitchen where they had cooked together. The porch where they had watched sunsets. The bed where they had held each other for thousands of nights. The entire ranch was full of her presence, and every corner of it made him ache with loss. 3 months after Sarah's death, Dalton was out checking fence lines alone when his horse spooked at a rattlesnake. Dalton was thrown, landing hard on the rocky ground. He felt something in his chest tear, a sharp pain that took his breath away. He tried to get up and could not. He lay there on the Nevada ground, staring up at the blue sky, and felt a strange sense of peace. He was 70 years old. He had lived a good life. He had loved and been loved. He had built something that would outlast him, a ranch and a family that would continue long after he was gone. "Sarah," he whispered to the sky, "I am coming." Thomas found him an hour later, still alive but fading. They got him back to the house and into bed, but Dalton knew it was the end. He gathered his children around him that evening. "I love you all," he said, his voice weak. "I am so proud of the people you have become. Your mother and I built this ranch together, and now it is yours. Take care of it. Take care of each other." "Papa, do not leave us," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "I have to, sweetheart. It is my time, but I am not sad. I am going to be with your mother again." He smiled, and for the first time since Sarah had died, the smile reached his eyes. "I have missed her so much." Dalton Owens died that night, surrounded by his children, their hands holding his. His last words were Sarah's name, spoken with love and longing. They buried him next to Sarah on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones. The funeral was as well attended as Sarah's had been. The whole community came to pay respects to the quiet cowboy who had built a life of integrity and love. At the funeral, Emma stood and spoke about her parents. "My father once told me that the day he married my mother was the day his life really began. He stood up in a church and made an offer that changed everything. It was brave and reckless and completely true. He loved my mother with everything he had, and she loved him the same way. They built something beautiful together, not just this ranch, but a family and a life full of love and meaning. We are all here because of their courage and their love. We will carry that forward. Their story does not end here. It continues in us and in our children and in all the lives they touched." The ranch did continue, passed down through the family. James and his sons took over the main operation. Thomas expanded the horse breeding program. Lily and Peter managed the day-to-day operations. Emma returned from Carson City after Michael died and lived in the main house, teaching the grandchildren and great-grandchildren their letters and numbers at the same kitchen table where Sarah had taught her. The little house that had belonged to just Dalton when Sarah first arrived, the house where they had raised their 4 children and built their life, became a gathering place for family. Every Sunday, the family would come together there for dinner, 3 and then 4 generations crowding into the small rooms, spilling out onto the porch, filling the air with laughter and talk and love. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the Nevada hills, the family members would sit on that porch and tell the story of how it all began. How Sarah Bennett had been left at the altar in front of everyone. How a quiet cowboy named Dalton Owens had stood up and said, "I will marry you." How a moment of scandal and humiliation had transformed into one of the greatest love stories any of them had ever known. The story became family legend, passed down through the generations, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best ones. That courage and kindness matter. That love, real love, is built on honesty and respect and choosing each other every single day. The ranch itself stood as a testament to that love, to the life that Sarah and Dalton had built together from nothing. The land they had worked, the house they had shared, the family they had raised, all of it continued long after they were gone. A living legacy of 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something extraordinary together. And on the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 simple stones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Sarah Bennett Owens and Dalton Owens. The stones were weathered now by decades of Nevada sun and wind and snow, but the words carved into them remained clear. Sarah Bennett Owens' beloved wife, mother, grandmother 1846. 1904, she chose courage. Dalton Owens' beloved husband, father, grandfather 1844-1904, he chose love together. They had chosen each other, and that choice had made all the difference.